He healed people with a dentist's drill, then walked into the desert, a wanted man, to stand beside the lawman who needed him most. This is the true story of Doc Holliday. John Henry Doc Holliday was born in a small town in Georgia in 1851. From the start, people noticed his sharp mind and quiet smile. He read more than most boys his age. He asked many questions and liked learning new things. His family taught him manners and careful speech. They fed him stories and books. He learned to sit straight and to speak clearly. These early lessons would travel with him all his life. As a child, he was polite and observant. He watched how adults moved and how they reacted to bad news. He learned to calm others with steady words. His teachers saw him as serious and reliable. He loved books about history and the law. He liked stories of smart men who solved problems with their heads. At home, he also learned music and enjoyed quiet evenings with family. He had a gentle side that he kept close. When he was old enough, he studied dentistry. In those days, a dentist needed steady hands and patience. He trained to work with small tools and to speak softly to patients. People trusted him to ease pain and fix teeth. The practice taught him to be precise. He learned to move without hurry and to focus on small details. These skills later helped him in other parts of his life. He could stay calm when other men lost their heads. Then came a harsh change. Doctors found a disease in his lungs that the world called consumption. Today, people say tuberculosis. It was a slow and terrible sickness. At that time, there was no cure. The news of the illness changed his path. He could have lived a quiet life and worked slowly toward old age. Instead, he chose another road. He left his home and went west. The dry air of the west seemed a better match for his lungs. The towns he chose were rough and busy. They gave him work and also new dangers. He still used his dental skills when he could, but he also found work that fit his sharp mind and steady hands. He learned to watch people closely. He sat at card tables and watched how men handled chips and cards. He learned to read faces and to spot a lie. Gambling became his new profession. He did not seek fights for glory. He sought to win with skill and calm. In a smoky saloon, he could sit for hours and watch the rhythm of a play. He learned to see the tiny tells that showed fear or bluff. The same steady hands that used a drill now held cards and coins. He showed a cool face even when the stakes rose high. This calm made people both trust and fear him. People in the West began to talk about him. They said he had a smart mind and a sharp tongue. He could joke and sting in the same sentence. He had a way of speaking that could warm a friendly room or silence a rival. He kept his illness private. Only close friends sometimes saw him cough or feel weak. He did not want pity. He wanted to be seen for his skill and his wits. Even as his health failed, he found a strange kind of freedom. When a man feels time is short, small things change their meaning. Money and plans matter less. A strong laugh and a true friend mean more. Doc learned to value loyalty above many other things. He kept promises when others did not. He respected men who acted with honor. This code made him hard to predict. He could be kind and cruel in the same day, for he judged people by their actions. He kept pieces of his Southern upbringing. He still used polite speech when a situation called for it. He could recite a line of poetry in a loud saloon and then sit back with a steady smile. He loved a clever phrase and could deliver it with deadly timing. His manners and his wit made him a strange figure in rough towns. Some called him a gentleman. Others called him dangerous. Both views held a truth. Stories about him grew as he moved from town to town. People told tall tales of his courage and his fights. Some said he could kill at the blink of an eye. Others said he was more of a poet than a gunman. These stories mixed truth and rumor. He did have a calm that made some men nervous. He did choose friends who might drag him into danger. But many of the worst tales were the work of gossip and print writers who loved a good legend. By the time he reached his 30s, his life had formed into a clear shape. He was a trained dentist who had become a gambler. He was a sick man who lived boldly. He was a man who watched others and who valued loyalty above most things. He did not become a legend by choice. Life and illness pushed him into the places where legends grow. The first part of his life showed a man of skill, wit, and quiet danger. He moved forward into the West with steady hands and a sharp mind, ready to meet what came next. John Henry Holliday learned to use his hands before most boys did. He learned to be careful with small things. He learned to be patient. These lessons came from books, teachers, and long hours in quiet rooms. They also came from the work he chose, dentistry. He went north to study. The classrooms were different from his home. They were full of men who wanted to learn the same steady skill. The light was bright. The tools were new and cold in his palm. He read about teeth and bone. He read about pain and how to ease it. Many of the lessons were small. Many were about silence. A dentist must not frighten a patient. A dentist must not rush. Holliday learned this well. The work was exact. He used small drills and thin wires. He held a lamp close to a mouth and looked for length and angle. He learned to steady a hand that would not shake. He learned to speak in soft, calm sentences that could soothe a tight jaw. The practice taught him to watch breath and eye. This careful watching later helped him read people in a very different place, the card table. School days were long. He spent mornings in class and afternoons in practice. He practiced on models of teeth. He practiced on patients who came for help. The patients sat in chairs with wide eyes. Many of them feared pain. Holliday learned to meet that fear with a steady voice. He learned that a kind word could ease fear as much as a good skill. He also learned to think like a doctor. He kept notes. He watched how a small sign could mean a large problem. He learned to ask questions that made sense. When a patient said a cough was only a cough, he would ask more. The training taught him to be curious and to trust small facts. Those habits stayed with him the rest of his life, but the life of a dentist was not only calm rooms and steady hands. It had strain. He spent time with people who were sick or afraid. He learned to hold pain and not let it show. The job demanded a skin that could hide worry. He learned to be brave in small ways. Each time he soothed a child or fixed a tooth, he built a quiet courage. He put this courage into his voice. Later, that voice would belong to a man the West would not forget. In those northern towns, he saw other faces of life. He saw men who worked in factories, men who drank too much, and men who told wild stories. He met people who were both gentle and cruel. He met friends who would later share a road with him in the West. This mix of people taught him how different life could be. After finishing his training, he returned home for a while. He opened a small practice. He fixed teeth and set broken jaw pieces. People liked him. They said he cared for them as much as his work. He seemed to know when a small kindness would matter more than a costly treatment. In the slow afternoons, he would sit and read. He would think of new lessons he read in books. He liked books on law and stories of clever men who solved hard problems. Then his life changed. A cough that would not stop began to grow. Doctors looked and grew quiet. The word they used was old and feared. He would have to change his life because the lungs that carried his breath were not well. At first he tried to keep working. He still fixed teeth. He still saw patients. But the cough grew heavier. Nights became harder. He lost sleep. He felt tired in the bones. The illness taught him about time. Every breath had weight. He began to see life as something to use now. The careful planning he once admired felt smaller. He wanted days where the sun felt warm and the air did not press on his chest. He wanted to live where the dry wind might help him breathe easier. His trained mind told him to seek a better climate. His brave heart told him to not waste the days he had, so he packed a small bag. He kept his dental tools for a time. He took a few books. He wore a coat and left the town where he had practiced. He traveled west to seek better air. The change was hard. He left behind patients who trusted him. He left behind a steady life. The choice was not an escape. It was a calculation. He weighed risks with the same care he had used to weigh treatment plans. He chose the road he hoped would add days to his life. In the West, the skill he brought stayed with him. He still knew how to take a pulse and look at a mouth. When towns had no dentist, he could help. A broken tooth or a bad jaw could cause a stranger to choose a quiet life over a violent one. His hands could make that choice easier. He gave relief where there was pain. In these moments, the small courage inside him showed itself again, but the West had other demands. Its towns moved fast. People came and went. The same steady rooms were rare. The new life asked for sharp eyesight, for a different kind of danger. The steady hands that had held drills now found their fingers on cards. The patient voice that calmed a child now spoke calm words in a smoky room. He learned to read faces the way he once read teeth. A twitch at the lip could mean a lie. A cough could mean fear. He used his old training in new ways. Even with this shift, he kept respect for skill. He admired craft wherever he saw it. He admired a carpenter who cut a board to the exact size. He admired a lawman who kept his wits. He liked people who practiced a thing until it looked simple. His own work had taught him this. that practice makes the hard seem easy. In quiet hours, he thought of the patients he had eased. He thought of the hands that had trained him. He thought of lectures that hid secrets about the human body and the human spirit. He felt the pull of two lives, the life of a healer and the life of a gambler. He did not choose these two lives at once. The illness pushed him. The West pulled him. Still, he kept a thread between both lives. He was a man who could heal and also a man who could put a card down with a cool face. These strands became his strange strength. He moves deeper into the West. He will meet men who shape his fate. He will learn a new kind of loyalty. But the hands that fix teeth will remain with him. They will steady the man who faces danger with a quiet voice and steady aim. A cough began like a cold, but it did not leave. At first, John Henry Holliday thought it would pass. He kept working. He kept reading. He kept treating patients the way he always had, careful, calm, and kind. But the cough came back and grew worse. It took his breath in quiet moments. It stole his sleep. It made him step outside into the cold night air to breathe more freely. Doctors listened when he spoke. Their faces grew quiet. They used a word that in those years carried fear and slow days: consumption. It was a disease of the lungs that ate a man from the inside. People saw it as a long illness, full of hard nights and small comforts. There was no simple cure. For a man who had learned to fix pain with steady hands, the news felt like a new kind of helplessness. The sickness changed him in small ways at first. He grew thinner. His skin lost a bit of color. He coughed after walking a short block. He stopped staying up late to read by lamplight. He started to notice the weather more than before. Cold mornings made his chest tight. Dry wind offered a strange relief. He learned which inns had warm rooms and which towns had open, clear air. These small facts became important to him. They began to shape his choices. It also changed the work he could do. The long hours over a lamp in a cramped dental chair grew hard to bear. The dust in some rooms and the close breath of a nervous patient made his chest tight. He tried to keep his practice for a while. He did not want to leave behind the quiet life he had built. But when a man must breathe differently, his life must change too. He sold or closed the practice. He packed up a small set of tools he could carry and set his foot toward a new direction. Sickness taught him about time in a sharp way. When a man believes his days are fewer, choices start to mean more. John felt the weight of this truth. He looked at plans for the future and saw them small and fragile. He thought of friends, of books left unread, of places he had never seen. He felt the pull to use the days he had for things that mattered most to him: freedom, dignity, and truth in how he lived. That feeling pushed him west. The West promised dry air and open horizons. It promised towns that rose fast and fell fast, and climate that might not press on his lungs the way damp northern winters did. He hoped that the wide sky could give him a better breath and a softer end. Many men in his place chose the same route, a move not only for health, but also for a life that matched a new urgency. For John, it was both a medical hope and a personal choice. The sickness also shaped how he met other people. He learned to hide some pains and show others. He did not want pity. He wanted to be judged by what he could do and what he would do. So he kept a careful face in public. He laughed when it fit. He spoke sharply when a joke needed it. He let close friends see the weaker moments, the nights he coughed until his chest hurt, the mornings when a simple walk left him tired. Those friends saw a man who chose to live fully even as breath grew scarce. Living under a shadow of illness taught him a new kind of honesty. He could no longer pretend that time was endless. He stopped making promises he could not keep. He kept the promises he had. He valued loyalty above many other things. A friend who stayed by his side during a cough or a fever earned a deep trust. He repaid that trust with fierce loyalty. This trait would mark many of the choices he made later. When he stood with men in danger, when he rode down a long road for a friend, when he faced a crowd who wanted to judge him, the sickness also sharpened his risks. When a man has little to lose in time, his caution can change. John began to take fewer small cares and more big chances. He would sit at a card table much later and push harder when the play turned risky. He would speak faster and truer when an insult came his way. For some men, this change looked like bravery. For others, it seemed like recklessness. For John, it was a mix of both: the sober knowledge that life can end and the desire to fill it with fierce, certain moments. Doctors of that age suggested rest, warm climates, and simple living. John tried these things as best he could. He kept some tools with him in case a town needed a dentist. He kept a few books to keep his mind sharp. He searched for dry valleys and warm sun. But the West is not only open sky and healing air. It has noise, rough men, and sudden danger. When a sick man moves into that world, he learns to use both his mind and his will. The sickness changed his body, but it did not break his spirit. He continued to charm people, to speak with a polite tongue, and to hold a steady hand. People who met him often remembered his clear voice and the precise way he looked at a face. He still loved a quick joke and the right phrase. He liked a well-made chair and the correct measure of a story. These small pleasures kept him human in the heart of the West. At times, the disease made him angry. He had a mind that loved study and order. He had worked hard to learn a craft. To lose that quiet life to an invisible enemy brought bitterness. He could be sharp with men who wasted time or showed cruelty. He could not stand lies. He preferred men who stood straight and kept their word. This honesty made him both admired and feared. Men did not always like being judged in a slow, exact way. The sickness also left room for tenderness. When a friend was in trouble, he could show a caring side that surprised many. He would sit through a night with a fevered man, or pay for a small surgery, or lend a book that might comfort. He paid attention to the little details that comfort brings. A warm blanket, a quiet room, a soft word. This tenderness made his loyalty real. It was not only courage at gunpoint. It was courage in the small hours when the world slept and his cough kept him awake. As the months passed, John learned to live with two stories at once. One story was a man who had trained to heal and who could still help a broken jaw or a sick tooth. The other story was of a man racing time, choosing bold acts and new friendships that would fill the days he had. The two stories did not fight. They braided together. His hands that held a drill could also hold a deck of cards. His mind that read a medical chart could also read a man's face at a poker table. This chapter of his life ended with a clear decision: to go west and to make a life that fit his days. He left behind a small practice, a few patients, and the careful rooms of his earlier life. He carried with him a small bag of tools, a few books, and a heart that had learned the weight of each breath. He thought less of a long life and more of a real one. The sickness had shortened the time he might live, but it had sharpened the way he chose to live it. He walks away from a small town and toward an open sky, choosing the wide road that will change the rest of his life. John Henry Holliday arrived in the West with a small bag and steady hands. The dry air felt different on his face. The sky was wide and empty in a way that made him breathe deeper. He found towns that grew fast and changed fast. Each place had its own rhythm: a mine shaft, a saloon, a sheriff's office, and a doctor who might be gone by morning. In these towns, skill had many faces. Holliday had one skill from his past that fit more than anyone guessed. He could read people. Gambling was the work that opened doors for him. It was honest work in its own way. Men came to the table with truth in their eyes and secrets in their hands. A good gambler watched patterns, small movements, the way a man touched his hat or his cards. Holliday learned quickly. His hands, trained to be steady by drills and wire, moved with fine control. He watched breath, watched a pulse at the wrist, watched the flash of a thought cross a face. These small things told him more than spoken words ever could. The saloon smelled of smoke, coffee, old wood, and spilled whiskey. Lamps burned low. Men leaned close, voices dropped, and the clink of coins was a steady song. Holliday sat at the edge of rooms with a calm that people noticed. He did not show his nerves. He did not need to. He used calm like a tool. When a man tried to bluff, Holliday's face stayed like a mask. When a man had a tell, Holliday smiled as if he heard a private joke. Wins and losses meant money, yes, but they meant something else too. They tested courage and truth. Holliday liked that test. He learned to play many games well. He learned how to judge a hand and when to fold. He learned how to speak a quiet sentence that would put a man off his play. He learned to accept that a loss was a lesson and a win was only as good as the next deal. Other gamblers watched him as a study in calm. Some called him cold. Some called him clever. He did not fight that talk. Names are small things in fast towns. His reputation grew slowly, not by loud stories, but by steady reports at the tables. Men who wanted to win sought him out. Men who wanted trouble found him too. A gambler who reads faces well will make friends and enemies in the same breath. Holliday kept few long friendships at first. He kept a few important ones. He stayed careful about whom he trusted. A bad man could make the West a dangerous place in the blink of an eye. He carried his teeth tools sometimes, tucked away in a corner of his bag. If a town had no dentist, he would set a small light and help a man in pain. People remembered that. It made his presence useful and odd at the same time. The same hands that soothed a fever could also slide a deck with quick skill. That contrast made him stand out. People liked oddities. They told stories. Drinking was part of the life he found. Saloon glasses clinked, and men used drink to warm their hands, calm nerves, or forget a loss. Holliday used drink in different ways. Sometimes it eased a cough at night. Sometimes it helped him stay awake at a table through the long hours. It also made him sharper at times and clumsy at others. His choices with drink were human choices. He had a body that betrayed him now and then. When the bottle helped him face an hour, he took it. When it clouded his sense, he paid the price. The West tested his temper in other ways. Men insulted him for being a doctor in a gambler's suit. They tested his courtesy and his pride. Sometimes a cheap insult or a false claim would turn a quiet table into a dangerous meeting. Holliday disliked lies and wasted time. He grew thin with anger when a man cheated or showed no honor. He would not tolerate needless cruelty. That intolerance brought him close to fights. But he did not start fights for fun. He started them when there was no other answer, when a friend needed protection, or when a man's lie could damage many. Still, most days were quiet at the tables. He would read a book between deals. He would listen to a story told low across a wood table. He liked history and law, and he liked clever lines of speech. He kept a sharp tongue and a ready laugh. People remembered a clever line as much as they remembered a hand won. He had a way with words that could cut or heal. That way made men watch him with respect and a shade of fear. Travel was part of the job. He moved from town to town when the air pushed his cough and when a town grew tired of one player. Sometimes money ran thin, and he lived on small jobs. He could mend a man's tooth and then sit at a game to earn the price of a dinner. This life taught him resourcefulness. He learned to stretch his days and his coins. He learned to count small favors as wealth. He learned to sleep lightly and to watch the door. Stories about him began to follow. A gambler who never showed fear, a man who could fix a broken jaw and a broken night with equal care. Some stories dressed him up with more courage than he showed in truth. Rumor loves color and drama. Holliday learned to let the rumor be rumor. He cared about truth in action more than truth in print. He kept his real life small and close to the few friends he trusted. Those friends mattered more than the cards. Loyalty became a quiet rule for him. A man who stood by a friend in sickness or gamble earned a deep thanks. Holliday believed in certain kinds of honor. He respected men who kept their word. He respected men who acted with care when a life was at stake. In a world of quick fortunes and quick fights, that respect felt like a rare treasure. As his health wavered, his willingness to risk grew. A man with a thin timeline sometimes feels he must fill each hour with meaning. For Holliday, the card table was not only a job, it was a way to prove something to himself. He proved that he could still be precise. He proved that he could still see through a man's face and find the truth. He proved that he could live boldly even as his body grew weaker. It was in this period that he met men who would shape his future. Some he met across a table. Some he met in the quiet of a doctor's room or at a boarding house stove. One friendship would grow into a deep tie that would pull him into a story larger than any saloon. He would find a man who shared his sense of order and judgment, a man who would need someone like Holliday at his side. That meeting would change the route of his life. John Henry Holliday had met many men at card tables and in boarding houses. Most came and went. Most were loud and forgettable. Then he met Wyatt Earp, a man with a steady face and a steady rule. The meeting did not happen with a trumpet fanfare. It began with a look, a short talk, and the slow rise of respect between two very different men. Wyatt Earp stood like a man who measured a room before he spoke. He wore a lawman's calm and the sort of plain dress that belonged to work, not show. People noticed how he watched a fight before stepping in. He seemed to hold his anger in reserve, like a weapon kept ready but not waved for show. Where Doc burned quick and sharp, Wyatt moved slow and sure. The difference made them fit together, like two pieces of a puzzle. They met in the dusty towns of the frontier, places built out of hurry and need. There were arguments about land, fights over money, and the constant hum of men testing each other. In times like that, two qualities mattered most: a clear head and a steady hand. Doc had both in his own way. Wyatt had both in his. They saw these qualities in each other first, and like men who know value when they see it, they kept their distance until trust grew. At first, their friendship was small. It was a shared drink in a low light, a quiet word after a messy town meeting, a look that said, "I see you." They spoke about simple things: trade routes, troubles in town, nights when the wind cut through the street. These talks carried more than weather news. They showed how each man thought. Doc found Wyatt's code easy to respect. Wyatt believed in order, in keeping a promise, and in acting when it mattered. Wyatt found Doc's fierce loyalty and sharp mind useful in a world where decisions had little time for doubt. They were both men marked by time and hardship. Doc carried the ache of illness and the restlessness that it brings. He lived with the knowledge that each day might carry weight. Wyatt carried the weight of duty, the slow grind of enforcing law in places where law was thin. Each saw in the other a kind of strength that did not need a show. Doc admired the quiet authority Wyatt wore. Wyatt admired the cool courage Doc held, the way Doc could face a room and not blink. Small acts built their bond. When a fight threatened to boil over, Wyatt often stepped forward to calm the crowd. Doc stood with him. When a man tried to cheat at a table and then turned angry, Wyatt's presence made the man think twice. When a man tried to speak false of Wyatt, Doc's quick words shut him down. They did not loudly promise fealty. Their loyalty was shown in steady action. A pistol kept holstered until it was needed, a strong arm in a square moment, a hand steadying a friend's shoulder in the dark after a long ride. Their friendship was not about sameness. They did not always agree. Wyatt could be colder about law and punishment. Doc felt too much about honor to see cruelty with quiet eyes. When Wyatt made a hard call, Doc sometimes asked questions that cut through easy answers. When Doc wanted to push forward in anger, Wyatt's calm could slow him. Their differences made each stronger. Each man gave the other something he lacked. Doc gave Wyatt an unflinching courage and quick wit. Wyatt gave Doc a form of steadiness and direction. Word spread about their companionship. In towns, people talked of the lawman and the gambler who stood together. Some saw the pair as strange allies. Others saw them as a force to be counted on. A man who had both the lawman's steadiness and the gambler's nerve tended to change the way trouble thought. People planning mischief began to wonder twice. For the good men, the pair brought a sense of protection. For the dangerous, they brought a warning. The bond ran deeper than the need for muscle. It was born of shared values. Both men valued honor in their own way. Wyatt valued order and the rule of law. Doc valued loyalty and the courage to keep a promise. When a friend was wronged, both men cared in serious ways. When danger edged near, they met it together. When a town needed to stand, they stood clear and true. There were quiet, private parts of their friendship, too. They shared small stories late at night, tales of childhood, of a home left behind, of doctor's words that could not be undone. Doc sometimes laughed with Wyatt at odd memories. Wyatt sometimes listened to Doc speak of things he had learned in classrooms long before the West. These small truths made their public strength feel like something more than a tool. It became a trust that could not be bought. Not all men liked the pair. Some saw Wyatt's willingness to act as too harsh. Some saw Doc's quick temper as dangerous. Rumors followed, and rumors can twist the truth. Still, for every whisper, there were facts. They stood by one another in fights. They sat together at tables when others left, and they returned favors without fanfare. Friendship in the West was often tested in blood or breath. Their friendship survived many tests because it rested on truth and shared consequence. The meeting of Wyatt and Doc changed both men. It did not take away Doc's illness or Wyatt's hard duty, but it gave each a kind of balance. Doc gained a purpose that felt steadier than the next hand of cards. Wyatt gained a partner whose mind cut through smoke and lies. Together they moved into a future that would test them almost from the first day. The two men together, small against a big, restless town. The next part will bring them to a place called Tombstone, where loyalty and law will be forced into a blast of gunfire and choices that cannot be undone. Tombstone was a town that rose from rock and money. It lived on silver. The ground seemed full of promise, and people came fast. Stores opened. Saloons filled. Horses stamped dust into the streets. New faces walked each day. In that growing noise, small wrongs could become big problems in a short time. John Henry Holliday had arrived when the town was busy and hot. The dry air helped his breathing some days. The sound of boots and laughter filled the room where he sat to play cards. But a town built on quick fortunes also built quick anger. Men lost money, men lost pride, and when pride was lost in a place like Tombstone, trouble followed close behind. Tombstone carried many kinds of men. Some worked the mines, some ran stores, some kept the law, and some worked outside the law. People called one group the Earps. They were men who tried to keep order. They did not always look the same or act the same, but they wanted a town that could stay safe for families and business. Other men, called the cowboys by many, lived on a different set of rules. They liked a looser life. They sometimes took what was easy and pushed at the law. Both sides waited for a small spark. For Holliday, the town was a new kind of test. He had been a gambler in many places before. In Tombstone, the stakes felt higher. A look on a man's face could start a fight. An insult in the wrong room could cost a life. Holliday watched the town with an eye that had learned to read small signs. He saw who bent toward violence and who bent toward money. He chose his moments. He did not seek trouble, but he did not step from it when it came. His ties with Wyatt Earp grew stronger in this place. Wyatt worked the town in a way that tried to balance business and safety. He kept a careful watch and often stepped into fights where people might be hurt. Having Wyatt close meant Holliday had a reason to act beyond a hand of cards. He had a bond that asked for loyalty. That bond would push him forward when small slights became dangerous. Pressure in Tombstone built like a slow drum. It started with small pushes, a sharp word at a saloon, a cheek slapped in anger, a horse stolen in the night. Then it rose to louder knocks, a man beaten in the street, a gun fired as a show. The town began to split into parts. Stores and families felt the strain. Men who liked ease worried. Men who liked rules prepared to act. Holliday felt this pressure in his chest as much as in the town square. Each cough reminded him that life was short. Each insult reminded him that some men would not stop until they broke others. He saw his friends pulled into fights that did not need to be fought. He saw men who used a gun like a tool for fear. He saw children who watched grown men burn their names in the paper for a small thing. These sights made his loyalty sharper. He chose to stand where his friends needed him, even when the price was danger. Tension made the small moments dramatic. In a market, a pushed shoulder could be a promise of violence. In a saloon, a loose word could be a line drawn in dust. People began to watch the Earps and the cowboys like two lines facing each other. Night rides and loud whispers followed. The town's newspapers printed firm words that made hard feelings harder. Men who might have smiled in other times now kept their hands near their belts. For Holliday, the card table sometimes offered a safe space and sometimes a trap. At a game, he could test a man's truth, but a man who lost his pride might leave a table and look for other ways to recover it. Holliday had many small confrontations. Some ended with a nod and a drink. Some ended with a drawn weapon. He learned fast which men would fold under pressure and which would press forward to violence. He chose his company with care. The pressure also brought out the town's best and worst. Some people worked harder to keep businesses safe. They spoke with leaders and asked for calm. They wanted families to go on with their lives. These voices tried to pull the town from the edge. Other men took the heat and hit back. They used rough methods and loud threats. Tombstone was a place where good sense struggled to rule over hot blood and fast money. As small fights kept coming, the Earps stood more in public. Wyatt and his brothers tried to act as the steady face of law. They walked through the streets and visited shops. They tried to stop trouble by showing themselves as a presence that did not welcome lawless acts. That presence cost them. It put them in the path of men who did not like being watched. A town that needs peace often needs visible force, and visible force always makes enemies. Holliday found himself between two needs. He wanted the calm that let him play his best games. He wanted the loyalty that kept a friend safe. Those needs pulled him in different directions. Sometimes a gambler's calm could solve a problem. Other times only force could stop an attack. He felt the call to be both wise and ready. He learned to hold his temper until a clear line was crossed. Then he moved fast. The pressure of Tombstone did not always make sense to outsiders. Newspapers in far cities wrote stories that mixed truth and rumor. Men who had never seen the town read bold lines and decided quickly who was right. The stories fed more tension. In towns built from metal and dust, reputation mattered. A name in a printed line could be a spark in a dry field. Holliday watched how honor and fear fed each other. He saw a man lose face and rage replace reason. He saw a lawman make a hard choice and then feel the cost. He saw friendships tested by small public moments. This watching taught him to weigh what he would accept and what he would not. His loyalty hardened into a rule he would follow. He would stand by those who stood by him. That rule would bring him to an impossible day. By the time the struggle pushed forward, it was no longer about small things. The town's future felt in a balance. Men had chosen sides. Conversations had turned into plans. In a place like Tombstone, one day of bad choices could change many lives. The town's streets grew ready for a storm that could break quickly and loudly. The next days will be the kind that history remembers. The gunfire that is to come will not be sudden. It will be the result of many small, hard choices made under the weight of pressure. The day of the fight was October 26, 1881. The sky was clear. The sun threw long shadows across Tombstone's dusty streets. People went about their business. Children might have played nearby. But the town moved with a quiet tension that morning. Small fights had grown into a larger fear. Men on both sides watched for a sign. The place where the fight would happen was a narrow lot behind a small corral. People called it the OK Corral, though the fight touched yards and streets near it too. The space was close. There was no wide field to run in. If men chose to use guns there, they would be face to face. That closeness made every look and every step mean more. Wyatt Earp, his brothers, and Doc Holliday stood together on one side. They were not many. They walked with a quiet that came from a hard life. Their faces were set. They had thought about what they must do. For them, the question had become clear. Stop a group that they said broke the law and threatened the town. On the other side stood men known as the Cowboys. Names were sharp in the town. Brothers with a temper, friends who rode fast and claimed a rough code. They claimed their own truth. Each man wore pride like a belt. Each man read the room with his own fear and his own anger. When two groups like this meet in a small space, rules can break fast. People later argued about the first move. Some said a shot came from one side. Some said it came from the other. Witnesses told different tales. The truth became a part of the larger story that history kept arguing over. For those who stood in the powder and smoke, the moment was raw and immediate. There was no time for long thought. The guns came up. In a place so tight, the sound was loud and sudden. Bullets flew. The fight lasted a very short time, less than a minute, an instant that could stretch forever in a man's memory. Men shouted or cried. The crack of steel on air mixed with the smell of gun smoke and the dry dust of the street. Faces were close. Men fell fast. Doc Holliday moved like a man used to quick care. He had steady hands from years of surgery and steady nerves from many nights at a table. In the fight, he did not hurry. He fired from the hip and from the shoulder. He kept low when he could. He watched where men moved and where danger grew. Even sick with tuberculosis, he found strength at that moment. Illness made his breathing hard, but not his will. Wyatt and his brothers kept tight ranks. They gave each other space and covered one another. That order mattered. In close fights, a step the wrong way could put a man in front of a bullet. Each Earp moved with the sense of a man who had practiced hard choices all his life. They were not reckless heroes. They were men doing a duty they believed in. When the smoke cleared for a half second, the truth showed hard. 3 men lay on the ground, badly hurt or dead. The town fell silent as if a hand had covered its mouth. 3 were killed. Others were wounded. The quick fight had deep cost. The loudness faded into a stunned quiet that sat heavy over the corral and the wooden boardwalks. After the shots stopped, men looked at what they had done. Faces that had been red with anger went pale. Even victories felt empty. The dead had fathers and mothers, names and small pasts. In a town of fast riches and fast fights, a death was not only a number. It became a question that weighed on every face. Was it justice or revenge? Doc stood among the living. He had a wound, a hard bruise or a graze, some pain that flashed. He kept his eyes on friends. He checked if the men he stood with could move. His hands, once used to a drill's small world, now reached for what a man needs after a storm: water, words, steadiness. He helped as he could. He spoke in short sentences. He ordered what had to be done without grand speeches. The town would split itself into stories after that day. Some called the Earps and Doc the law. They said the men had acted to keep peace. Others called them murderers who had used law as a mask. Newspapers grew loud. Lines were drawn in far places. Men who were not in Tombstone read the headlines and picked a side. History began to write its first drafts. For Doc Holliday, the fight became part of his identity. He was a man who had stood beside Wyatt. He had chosen loyalty over safety. He had risked his life for a friend. That choice defined him to some people as brave. To others, it made him reckless. Yet the man who had once fixed teeth and eased pain found himself in the center of a moment where a single decision shaped many lives. The emotional weight of the day was heavy. At first, men moved in automatic steps: count the dead, tend the wounds, lock the doors. Then the feeling moved in. The town felt hollow. Families came out of houses to see if a son or brother had been taken. Some people prayed. Others spat into the dust. Faces showed fear and anger and sorrow like a hard mix. The law moved next. Papers filed complaints. A court case followed. Men gave testimony, and each testimony tried to cut the memory into a shape that served one side. The guns did not end the fight. They started a long walk of judgment and questions. Trial rooms took the place of corral dust. Men who survived the fight had to stand in rooms where words would be used like weapons. Doc watched this slow court fight with eyes that knew how small words could be compared to blood. He felt tired. He felt the cough deeper some nights. Yet he did not step back from his choice. He spoke when needed. He sat when the trial required it. He kept the same steady voice he used by a patient's chair. He answered in short, clear phrases. In quiet, he thought of the men who had fallen and of what had led them there. He felt grief that did not fully show on his face. Later storytellers would make the fight into a long legend. They would add lines and bravado and whole speeches that no one had heard. They would forget the small gestures that mattered. A hand reaching for a loaded pistol, a man pausing too long to step aside, a boy hearing the shots from a porch. The real moments were raw and small. They were a flash of smoke and a lifetime of consequences. Doc's hands, not empty or idle, but doing the small, exact work of a man who had always fixed things. The quiet after the gunfire, a single shoe in the dust, a hat turned face down in a town that will never be the same. After the shots at the OK Corral, Tombstone did not calm. The town filled with questions and anger. People who had watched the fight told their own versions. Some saw the Earps and Doc as protectors. Others saw them as murderers. The noise of talk grew loud in saloons and on porches. Men who wanted peace felt afraid. Men who wanted revenge felt justified. The town split like a cracked plate. The law came close, but not close enough. Officials called for papers and hearings. Men were asked to stand and say what they saw. The courts moved slowly. While the law looked for clear answers, feelings moved faster. Hurt and pride do not wait on judges. A man with a fresh wound or a lost brother looks for more than words. For many, only action could answer the pain. Then came worse news. Shots found other men afterwards. Virgil Earp, Wyatt's brother, was badly hurt by an ambush. A few months later, Morgan Earp was killed while walking on a city street. These attacks were not small blows. They were meant to warn and to wound a family. The Earps felt the danger as a strike at their home and their work. Grief turned to a hard, sharp need for justice. But the legal road seemed too slow and too soft for the kind of hurt they felt. Wyatt chose a different path. He called a small group of men who would not wait for slow courts. They would find the men they believed were behind the attacks. They would ride and bring them to answer. People later called this the vendetta. It was a plan that mixed law and revenge. Some townsfolk cheered. Some called it a dangerous choice. In the West, lines between law and revenge often blur. In that blur, men like Wyatt and Doc made their own rules. Doc Holliday's choice was clear to him. He had lost friends. He had stood with Wyatt at the corral. He had seen brothers fall into town in tears. For all his jokes and soft words, Doc had a fierce loyalty that did not bend. When a friend asked for help, Doc answered. He joined the ride. He rode with a sense that life was short and that promises mattered. A man who keeps his word even when the cost is high is a rare thing in a harsh place. Riding in the vendetta was different from sitting at a card table. Nights were cold and long. Men rode hard through open land where the sky was very wide and very dark. They followed leads and rumors. They stopped at small houses and silent camps. Each knock on a door could bring a fight. Each new face could be a threat. The weather and the road wore on them. Doc's cough rode with him. It came in quiet moments and loud moments. It reminded him that his body was not a simple thing to push. Violence came again. The vendetta led to more gun clashes and to men killed in the pursuit. Some men were found and shot. Some were chased into places where they would not return. The line between right and wrong grew thin. Men who had once been neighbors found themselves on different sides. Families were torn. People who wanted peace felt the harm of the violence. For those who rode, every act lived on them like a new weight. Doc changed in that time. He had always been quick with a joke and steady with a hand. Now he looked harder at what his actions meant. Sometimes he felt proud that he defended friends. Sometimes he felt the sting of regret. He had seen men fall. He had seen widows cry. He had heard the quiet of a town that feared more nights like these. His cough grew louder on cold nights. The drink that had sometimes eased him became a more frequent visitor. The pain and the memories lived close to his skin. People in places far from Tombstone read the news and sharpened their views. Some papers called Wyatt's group heroes who had taken needed action. Other papers called them murderers who had left the law behind. Doc became a part of both stories. To some he was a loyal friend who stood in a hard hour. To others he was a dangerous man who crossed a line. The differing voices made his name travel with more rumor and less truth. The legal world did try to follow. Arrests and questions came up later. Men who rode had to answer for what they did. Trials and threats of trials moved through towns like slow storms. For the riders, the idea of court sometimes felt unreal. A small room of words after nights of dirt and blood. For their opponents, the law became a place to search for balance. The two sides met in rooms and on dusty roads. Sometimes law found the right line. Sometimes it did not. Through the vendetta, Doc learned how thin honor could be when pushed by grief. He had acted for loyalty, but he now saw how actions made new debts. Killing in the name of justice closes one door, but opens many others. He watched friends who had once laughed now look away when a child asked about a father. He watched men who had once told stories now sit with a quiet that held a different tale. The road of revenge gave them moments of victory and years of cost. The ride also put a mark on Doc's reputation. Where he had been seen as clever and calm, some now saw him as a hardened figure, a man who would follow a friend into shadows. That image may have made some people fear him and others respect him. Often, reputation is a mirror held up by strangers. The man who looked in could not always see the whole truth. Doc knew his own faults and his own reasons. He kept them close. Like a warm coat he did not always show to others. By the end of the vendetta, the landscape of their lives had shifted. Friends were lost. Towns had changed. The Earps had paid a deep price. Doc had given much in return: nights of travel, shots fired, quiet grief at a loss. The road he had chosen to ride had not made the world simple. It had made it smaller in some ways and harsher in others. For Doc Holliday, the vendetta was not the last choice he would make. It was a turning of the road into a darker direction. He had stood for loyalty, and now he carried the cost. His cough still spoke in the night, and his hand still held skill. But his eyes saw a different future, one shadowed by the consequences of the ride. The next chapters of his life would ask him to face those costs more clearly. A man riding away into a wide, dark plain, a thin light behind him, and a small, hard promise he can no longer take back. The years after the vendetta were quieter in action, but louder in memory. John Henry Doc Holliday kept moving. He moved like a man who had fewer tomorrows and wanted to live each one fully. He went from town to town, sometimes chasing a good game, sometimes chasing warmth or a doctor's hope. The West gave him both small comforts and new pains. His cough came back harsher. His breath grew short on long rides. Still, he kept a steady face for strangers and a softer one for the few who stayed close. People who had known him in earlier days saw a change. The sharp wit still lived in his words, but the laugh came less often. The steady hands still moved with care, but they shook more at night. He held his cards the same way, but his eyes sometimes looked past the table to a distant place. His life had become a slow balancing act between stubborn motion and a body that asked for rest. He searched for places that might ease his lungs. The hot springs of Colorado called to him like a promise. Warm water and clear mountain air were a common hope for men with his sickness. He tried towns that offered quiet and clean breath. He let the hot water soak him and listened to the slow sound of steam. For a time, those places gave back a few easy hours and a lighter chest. They also offered a room by a small window where he could read or watch snow fall on a silent street. Money was never safe or long for him now. Wins at a table came and went. He often found a way to pay for a bed and a meal, but not always a long rest. When the coin ran thin, he took small jobs, a quick fix of a tooth, a small aid to a miner who had been hit, a favor that bought a night's lodging. These acts kept a thread between his early life as a dentist and the gambler he had become. They also kept him human in towns that loved stories as much as gold. His closest companion through these years was a woman known to many as Big Nose Kate. She and Doc had a long and stormy history. Their bond held a strange mixture of care and sharpness. She sometimes tended him when coughs came in the night. She sometimes argued with him in the morning. Through the quarrels and quiet hours, she stayed near. In the small rooms and noisy saloons, her presence was a steady fact in his life. For many who watched them, their pairing showed the messy truth of love among rough men. It could be tender and also full of hard edges. Doc faced new trouble of law and claim too. Small arrests and angry words followed him. He had fights that left scars and hearings that left papers on file. The West had many ways to punish a man even without a trail of courtrooms. Sometimes a man paid with a fine. Sometimes a man paid with sleep lost and trust broken. These small costs piled on top of a body that no longer had room for many new losses. Through it all, he kept a quiet pride. He did not ask for pity. He did not look for applause. He wanted truth in small things, a correct phrase, a clean bed, a hand that did what it promised. He measured a man by what he would do when the light was gone, and the next drink was the only comfort. That private code made him both stern and oddly loyal to a few names that mattered. As his breath weakened, memory moved forward. He thought of the slow classrooms and the careful lamps where he had learned to hold a drill. He thought of childhood rooms and polite sentences. He thought of the first cough and the first train west. He thought of Wyatt Earp and the nights at a table where friendship had been tested and proved. In quiet moments, the past came not as legend, but as a map of real losses and real choices. His final months came with small scenes rather than large acts. He sat by a window and watched light on cold streets. He listened to men laugh in the next room. He rested hands worn by many small labors, fixing teeth, sliding cards, holding a friend's shoulder. He scratched words on small sheets. He read a few lines from books he loved, and he slept when the cough allowed. He chose to meet his last days with the same steadiness he had tried to carry all his life. On November 8, 1887, in a small room at Glenwood Springs, Colorado, John Henry "Doc" Holliday died. The disease had tightened its hold and time had closed the circle. He left behind a life that had run fast and true by turns, a life of careful skill, sudden violence, fierce loyalty, and private sorrow. He was a man of many faces, a trained dentist, a gambler, a friend, a man who rode with lawmen and wore his own code with quiet pride. People remembered him in mixed ways. Some saw a brave figure who stood with his friend when the heat of battle came. Some saw a dangerous man who moved too easily between law and personal vengeance. Others saw a patient and educated man who had been forced by illness into a life he had not chosen for its calm. For those who had known him close, he was both more gentle and more broken than the public tales would allow. He was buried in Glenwood Springs. The card decks and dental tools that had traveled with him no longer warmed his hands. The small town mourned in the way small towns did, with quiet and a few remembered words. In a few places, the press wrote of him with large letters and louder judgment. In many quieter corners, people who had his small favors in mind told softer stories, of nights warmed by his jokes, of a hand that steadied a child's fear, of a promise kept when the cost was high. Doc's last story held an odd peace. In private, he had kept the same careful habits that guided him in youth. He had used his hands to help others until they could not help themselves. He had kept loyalty as a rule, even when it led him into danger. He had lived with an honest knowledge of his time. How a man meets time is a small test. How he keeps his heart in that time is the deeper measure. A quiet image of a small grave and a single playing card placed on the earth. Then pull back slowly to show the wide hills and the sky above. The same sky that once made a young man think of long roads and now held the silence of a life that ran full and ended simple. The final part will gather his story into a view of what he left behind, the man, the myth, and the truth between them. When John Henry Doc Holliday died, the West did not stop talking about him. Stories kept moving. Some were small and true, some were loud and false. Over time, the loud stories grew into a shape that covered the real man. People turned him into a symbol, a daring gunman, a witty drunk, a loyal friend, a tragic figure. Each story took a piece of the man and made it larger. The real picture stayed more quiet and more mixed. For many, Doc became the poem of the Old West. He was a line in a play, a cool voice in a movie, and a short phrase in a song. Actors gave him faces he never had. Writers gave him lines he never spoke. The public liked these larger-than-life versions. They made him easy to sell in newspapers and entertainment. A clear story is easier to tell than a messy life, so the clean, sharp image of Doc as a fearless gunfighter fit well. It sold well. It made people clap, but the truth kept its own steady shape. Doc had been a trained dentist. He had been a careful man who learned to watch small things. He had been sick for many years, and that sickness changed how he lived. He had been loyal to friends, and that loyalty sometimes led him into danger. He had been funny, educated, proud, and tired. None of these facts fit neatly into a single poster. The true man had rough edges and soft corners. He held both skill and illness, humor and sadness, courage and regret. When history looks at a man like Doc, it must hold two things at once. It must hold the story told by newspapers, plays, and films. It must also hold the documents, the letters, the small facts that speak plainly. The more a story is told, the more it can change. People remember the parts that shine brightest. They forget the ordinary care he gave to a patient, or the nights he felt alone, or the small favors that never made the paper. Yet those small things mattered to those who knew him close. Doc's life teaches a simple lesson about how we make heroes. We often choose the sharpest lines and leave out the rest. We like a man who is all courage, all wit, or all danger. But real people are a mix. Doc was not a single thing. He was a blend of care and risk, gentleness and violence. To know him well is to accept that he could hold a child's fear in one hand and a pistol in the other. That mixed truth makes him more human and more interesting than any single tale. The people who knew him best had a different memory than the press. Friends remembered his steady laugh, his sharp mind, and the nights he stayed up by a sick man's bedside. Some spoke of his rough ways and his quick temper. Others told of his quiet kindness and the times he gave without talk. These small memories build a fuller picture. They tell of a man who kept a simple code: keep your word, help those you can, and try to meet the end with dignity. Across years and scenes, his friendship with Wyatt Earp kept people talking. Some saw it as proof of his loyalty. Others saw it as the spark that pulled him into darker acts. Either way, the pair's story lives on because it shows a choice many people understand: face danger for a friend, or step back and keep safe. Doc chose the first many times. People both respect and fear that choice. It is a choice that makes story and makes cost. Time also changes memory. 100 years after his death, the faces and pictures look softer. The papers yellow and crack. Films remake his voice and image over and over. Yet in small museums and quiet towns, real things remain: a worn leather case, a faded photograph, a small grave marker. These small things keep the link to a real life. They remind us that behind the legend was a man who ate and slept and breathed and loved, just like anyone else. Today, Doc appears in many ways. He is a book chapter, a scene in a film, and a face in a photograph. Students read his story in history classes. Tourists stand where he once walked and try to feel the dust and the sun. Each person brings a new view. Some come for drama, some come for truth. Some come to say they walked the same boards and felt a link to a past that seems both close and far. The true legacy of Doc Holliday may not be in the exact number of times he fired a gun or the exact words he spoke under a lamplight. His legacy lies in the questions his life asks us. How do we measure courage? How do we hold loyalty and law at once? How does illness shape a life? How do small acts of kindness sit beside acts of violence? When a man chooses a friend over his own safety, what does that tell us about the shape of his heart? For storytellers, Doc is a gift. He gives a chance to tell about complexity in a simple time. For families, he is a caution to watch the cost of choices. For students of history, he is a reminder to look past the bright lines and find the small facts that hold truth. For everyone, his life offers one clear note. People are rarely what stories make them seem. They are many things, and their choices make the rest. As the years pass, Doc's story will keep changing. New books will come. New films will find a new voice. Some will keep the myth bright. Some will try to find a truer, softer man behind the legend. Both things will matter. The myth draws us in. The truth keeps us honest. Together they make a fuller memory. Doc Holliday was not only a legend, he was a man. Messy, brave, tired, and true in the small ways that last. The story has ends and starts again in the hearts of those who listen.